beautiful women it translates to, but it's like they're painted. It's not, just wood block. And I look at a lot of that stuff, and then I'm looking too at a lot of like imagery, like posters and popular culture imagery and
Hmm.
graphic design, all that stuff. I think it all kind of seeps in, but I'm just as equally like I love abstraction.
Sure.
And when I look at abstraction, I look at it for the painting quality, and I'm looking at the sort of the sonics of the way that like those strokes sound and the feeling that it's giving you. And
Hmm.
I think that's just as much an influence on the way that I'm making a painting, you know what I mean, than a painting that looks kind of like my painting.
Sure.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And so your work, there's like this printmaking sort of methodology in terms of having to choose. I feel like you choose a narrow palette to represent an environment that is full of infinite colors, right? And so
Yeah.
I feel like that palette has relates to the harmonics or the sonics that you're referring to. How do you go about making those choices? Because I mean, it's very conscious what narrow range you're going to work within, right?
Right. This is a good sort of musical parallel example of how I would draw, a comparison to that. So I feel like color in my life, using color in my images has always been like a feel thing. I know it's influenced by where I grew up and the palette around me. Like I think if I grew up in Brazil, I'd have a different color sense and palette than if I grew up in Pittsburgh. So I think the color is intuitive and it's influenced by my unconscious growing up and what I was around. And so I think it becomes a feel thing. And I use it purposefully in a lot of different ways. Like there will be some things that like one of the paintings in the show coming up is, a COVID parking lot, and there's orange cones and they're fluorescent orange. And that's just like a factual use of color that's supposed to signify that like caution or man-made things. So, but just like you said, there's this huge spectrum you can choose from with color. Like, how do you get to where you get? What's kind of a feel thing? It's kind of the vibe that you're trying to get across, and it does relate to your imagery, but it's not defined by that. And I think that's the same thing. Like, if you pick up a guitar, if you're a guitar player, there's so many sounds you can get out of a guitar, so many amps and guitars you could use. How do you fall on, a Les Paul with like a Fender amp, and it's like a feel thing. It's like how you want that tone to sound. And it's hard to define exactly what the feel is, but you kind of navigate towards a feel and a tone that you feel is yours, like Grant Green, the jazz guitarist. I remember reading a book about him, and his son was saying that to get his tone, he turned all his bass down and his treble down and turned his mid all the way up. And that was his tone, which is like a completely random way to get a specific tone. But it just, to him, that was the feel that he wanted, And I think we do that, or some of us do that when we're working with a palette. It's this combination of feel, comfort, and then pushing that and using things, explicitly. But it's, it's all kind of like serving the final thing you want to get across, which is almost impossible to define or to verbalize, but it's like a feel.
What's the size of the pieces these days? I mean, are they? Does it range?
Yeah, like the show I had in Japan was a lot of. I think the biggest one was like 4 by 5 foot, maybe, and a
Mhm.
lot of them were in the 16 to 24 inch range, like smaller work. And just in Japan, it just works better there. It's hard to have huge. The gallery's not as big. The places aren't as big. It just works to have smaller things. The biggest painting in the show coming up is a triptych that's ginormous. I mean, it's like, I don't know, it's probably 18 feet long, maybe, or
Mhm.
wide, and maybe like 8 feet high or something. So it's pretty big. So they range this the work in the show coming up is mostly in the 5 to 7 foot range, like bigger paintings, and then there's a few smaller ones too.
So I know in the past you've made an animation to accompany shows. Did you create an animation for this one?
Yeah, yeah. There's the animation that I'm going to show in this one is called LA Trance, and I worked on it with my friend Ben, who I collaborate with. Ben Radatz, he's a motion graphics guy in LA that we've collaborated for a long time, since my second show in New York. So, almost 20 years. And we did an animation based off like depopulated photographs he took from Los Angeles during COVID.
Oh,
So he
wow.
would go out and take all these images of, everything from Mulholland to Rodeo to, the Strip, and like all these places that are just vacated. And it was after a rainstorm, which is also weird for LA. So there's puddles everywhere. And the soundtrack is by Fortet. It's a song called LA Trance that we used for, we reached out and we thought that would be a great track to use for the animation, and he agreed to it. So it's kind of like a music video for that song as well. And yeah, so that is the animation for the show. That, there's a couple paintings in the show that are stills, like they're stills from that animation.
So I've seen your work on like sedition. Have you thought about releasing any of those animations as NFTs yet, or have you already done that?
I did early on in the process. I made sort of like, I minted a bunch of NFTs just because I was interested in it as a new medium and I was exploring it.
Mhm.
I've never really promoted it or tried necessarily to sell them, or I was just interested in how it operates in that landscape. But to be honest, it was kind of like the way I use social media. I just kind of like dump them there and then leave and go work and do other stuff. I think the hype of it has become, a thing. I think the idea of it is an interesting thing, but a lot of times the hype gets, it kind of kills a little bit of it in a way, as far as like the spirit of it.
Brian, I really appreciate your time this morning. If folks wanted to keep an eye on you and your work, where's the best place for them to check out? Is there?
All right, I'm ready. I'm ready to pitch it. I'm
All
ready
right.
to give. It's so funny because, at the end of my podcast, I always tell the artists like where can they find your work, and they're always, yeah, a little taken back, but I'm so used to that. Um, okay, so at Alfred Studios, my Instagram, and that's where I'm the most, active. And at Sound of Vision Podcast is where the podcast is. All the flyers and info for the podcast are. And I have a website at brianalfred.net. And the thing that I would love for people to check out is, this book, which just for the reason, like I think people will really like the stories in here, and the artists are amazing. So, and a lot of, we're doing a podcast. Some people aren't into podcasts, but even if you do listen to it all the time, this is a different thing. There's images. There's even like I had a guest book where people would like do sketches after each podcast when I did them in person. So we
Oh,
included
that's
some
awesome.
pages of those, which is kind of fun. It's like these funky, like little funny drawings that people have done. But the book is available through Atelier Editions. They're the publisher, and you can find it on our website or on the Sound of Vision podcast website. There's a link to the book where it can be pre-ordered, and it's coming out pretty soon. I think the end of May is when the scheduled release of it is, but it's available, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, all the other places too.
Cool.
It's kind of good if you can get it through the publisher, just more direct that way.
So just search for Brian Alfred, why I make art, and everything kind of falls into place, right?
There you go. Yeah.
Awesome. So let me ask you, back in the old days, you had a site, Paint Changer. What was the story behind Paint Changer?
I know, right? It's what's so weird. So when I was in grad school, I took a computer class in the lab, and basically the part of the task of it was to create a website. And this is how I'm getting older. Like, it was like make a website, and back then it was like GeoCities, right?
Right.
So you would just like and there was no like I learned HTML, so I had to like type this stuff out. So it's pretty basic, but the idea was I took a photos of a painting, one of those fractal paintings that I was doing, and I
Mm-hmm.
took it in stages. So every other day I would take a photo, and then I
Ah,
made a website, and the painting changed each time you clicked on it when you were in the website. And so I called the website. We had to come up with a title, and it wasn't going to be brianalfred.com at that point. It was GeoCities /Paint Changer or something, and that's how the name came. And then I made an email account, and it just became that was the moniker for a while, or not a moniker, but it was just something I used for a while. And then I remember maybe a couple years ago, my wife saying to me, it's like the Paint Changer thing is a little like, can't you just use your name? And I was like, no, some tax company in England took my name. They're called Brian Alfred. And so I can't use that. And then I looked and .net was available. So I just took that.
Well, at least, if you ever want to get into a career change, you can go into tax consulting, right?
Not only that, they sponsor a rugby team, like a professional rugby team. So there's a rugby team. I forget what team it is, but there's a team that has Brian Alfred on their chest, and they're out there destroying each other playing rugby, which is really weird for me.
That's awesome.
There's no Brian Alfreds out there. Like Alfred is a very rare last name. There's a lot of Alfords, but there's only a handful of Alfreds. So there's no Brian. There's like one other Brian Alfred out there that I know of.
That's crazy. Well, Brian, I really appreciate your time and your being so gracious as to answer all my questions and playing the Brian Alfred bingo card and stream of consciousness there. But been a big fan of your podcast for years. I've probably listened to somewhere between 150 and 200 of the episodes, and love your work. And it was a real pleasure having you on today, man.
Thanks so much. It was my pleasure. And, it's nice to not prepare and just talk, and just to, have questions asked to me. So I really appreciate that part of it. And thanks for listening to the podcast. It's always cool when I hear that people actually like it. I just do them and throw them into cyberspace, and, it's cool when people, dig into it and enjoy it.
Absolutely. Well, I really appreciate it. That's all the time we have for this week. You've been listening to Art Sense. You can find the show on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you've enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe, and while you're there, please rate the show and leave a quick review. Your feedback is the key to other folks finding us. If you'd like to see images related to the conversation, read a transcript, and find other bonus features, you can go to canvia.art and click on the podcast tab. If you'd like to reach out to me, you can email me at craig@canvia.art. Thanks for listening.